What's going on, guys? Chaos here. I figure since most people probably know me for my Fate Stay Night videos, or my visual novel Let's Plays in general, and my occasional coverage of Type Moon related stuff, I suppose. My point is I'm mostly probably known for the Fate Stay Night and the Tsukihime stuff, so I figured I'd make a video about Tsukihime since, as you guys know, I haven't really been... I unfortunately haven't really been able to play any Type Moon visual novels lately, considering the translation status for Witch of the Holy Night, or Maho Sukai no Yoro, is pretty much in just nothing is progressing with that at the moment. I've actually had quite a few people ask questions about this on Twitter and elsewhere about if I'm going to be continuing Witch of the Holy Night. Unfortunately, there is just... I've been keeping tabs on that for a while for the English translation of that game, and from what I can gather from what I've seen on the Nero forums and elsewhere, it just seems like the translation has changed hands quite a bit, and no progress has really been made. The person who was translating it just kind of fell off the face of the earth, and other people have had to take it up and try to translate the game, and progress has just been generally very slow, so... I'm not really sure what's going on. There is, however, somebody else translating it at the moment, and they have gotten up to Chapter 6, and as you guys know, I got past Chapter 7, so I'm just waiting for any progress with the other chapters to be, for it to be translated, because as soon as that happens, I will definitely get back to it, but as it stands right now, there is just, it's not happening, unfortunately, and that's just mainly due to this game just not getting any translation updates. Which is really a shame, because as I've said, I really liked what I played of it. But, again, I'm digressing quite a bit here. The main topic of this video, as you can probably tell from the title, is it possible that for a Tsukihime anime to work? Now, as you guys know, JC Staff did do a Tsukihime anime quite a ways back, and as we all know, that anime was so terrible that everybody in the community pretty much refers to it as, or just basically acts like it does not exist. I thought it was just as terrible, to be honest. I did actually read the manga, however, for Lunar Legend Tsukihime afterward, and surprisingly enough, the manga adaptation of Tsukihime is actually pretty solid. It does take quite a few things from... It does take quite a few liberties with the plot, but overall, the plot mostly remains the same. It's pretty much a straight adaptation of the Arcade route, with including some things from other routes as well. Kind of what the anime tried to do, but somehow it ends up doing it quite a bit better, which is fairly shocking. Unfortunately, the manga has only been published in the States up to Volume 6. So if you want to find this in English physically, you're pretty much out of luck. If you want to find the whole series, you're pretty much going to have to rely on scans. I still need to finish the series. I've read quite a bit into it, but I've never gotten around to finishing it. But from what I read, it's a pretty solid adaptation. I honestly, like I said in my video on Tsukihime that I made like a long time ago. I think it was an anime review I made of the game, or it was the Beginner's Guide to the Nasuverse. I don't know which video it was exactly. But I did say that if the Tsukihime anime should have basically followed the manga's example and tried to sort of more or less straight, adapt the Arcade route with, and also add some things from other routes as well. This is the most, this would be the best approach for if they were going to do a Tsukihime anime. I think that the only thing they could do would be to adapt Arcade's route. Arcade's route has the most information about Tsukihime and how the universe, and about how things work in the game. It is the most exposition-heavy route, but it is also the most eventful route in the game. As you guys know, the near side of the moon routes have a lot going on in them in comparison to the far side routes. Tsukihime has 5 routes, and the first 2 routes are the near side of the moon. The other 3 are the far side, that being Akiha, Kohaku, and Hisui. Now, in comparison to the near side, the far side just has much less going on, but it does go quite a bit into the history of the Tono family and the reality and what the Tono bloodline can actually do, along with Shiki's own past. As you might expect, Arcade is completely absent from these routes. She's only really shows up in her own route and in the CL route. Now, the main reason why I think they need to do Arcade's route is just because Ciel's route, while it does mostly revolve around her, and there are some new things in there, a lot of the major events from Arcwade's route, are pretty much carried over into Ciel's. And then when you get over to the far side routes, there's just not a lot going on in comparison to what you might see in near side. Now that goes back to, like I said, I think the best approach is just doing the Arcwade route, because in my opinion, it's the best route. It's very different from Fate, where the best route was actually, it's more debatable. A lot of people say Unlimited Blade works, and a lot of people say Heaven's Feel. My favorite was Heaven's Feel. However, with Tsukihime, it's the Arcwade route. And the Arcwade route is probably the best one, just because it gives you everything you really need to know about Tsukihime. Now, this again is also a debatable point. The other routes also kind of give you a lot of important information too. But the problem with that is that these routes are just bogged down in a lot of slice-of-life-esque things where you just go through Shiki's daily life and not much really happens, other than some strange things occurring around the house with Akiha or one of the maids, depending on whose route you go into, and you obviously learn more about them and why these things are happening. And things don't really start to pick up until the real Shiki shows up again. That's the only real major difference here. And then, of course, the original anime did incorporate that, and it made absolutely no sense. If there was going to be a new anime with Tsukihime, I definitely think they need to scrap the idea of putting in the antagonist as the brother from the Far Side routes that shows up again, and I just think they need to keep Roa. In terms of what studio I'd want to handle an anime for Tsukihime, I would probably have to say the obvious choice is Ufotable, as Ufotable seems to understand Nasu's works. It seems to be the go-to studio for any sort of Type Moon related stuff, and it's the studio that usually adapts Type Moon or anything from Type Moon. So I think Ufotable would be a studio that would be pretty obvious and would be preferable, but I think that there are some other studios that could do it as well. I will give my reasons for this. Another studio that could pull it off would actually be Studio White Fox, the studio behind Steins Gate, Akame ga Kill, and some other pretty good series as well, like ReZero. I think White Fox could do it because they have handled visual novel adaptations before, like they've done Steins Gate. I think they could pretty much apply the same sort of rule they did with the Steins Gate anime and just adapting Arcwade's route and maybe sort of adding a few things from the other routes, but at least giving some proper context for it. I think, they kind of did the same thing with Steins Gate as far as I'm aware, so I think they could definitely do something like that with Tsukihime. Another studio, I guess, could do it. I don't know. There's not a lot of other studios that I really think could tackle something like Tsukihime. Maybe Studio Wit, but I don't know. I'm not really basing that on much of anything, to be quite honest. I just think Studio Wit is a really good animation studio and is obviously, I think, an offshoot of Production IG. So I think that, maybe Studio Wit could do it, but in terms of how they would adapt it, I honestly have no idea. I think Ufotable would be the best option and obviously my first choice. But in terms of episode count, I think that 12 to 13 episodes should actually be fine for this sort of this type of anime. The story for the original visual novel for the first route, that being Arcwade's route, is fairly short actually. It does not take you very long to get through her route. So I don't think there needs to be 20 episodes or anything like that in order to cover everything from Arcwade's route. I think, they definitely need to cover some of Shiki's past, such as when he meets Aoko. I think that's very important. I think they should definitely do something with the Eclipse segment of the visual novel and somehow incorporate that. Now, I would say that's not entirely necessary. You don't have to do, include the Eclipse segment, but I do think it is somewhat necessary for Shiki's character arc that he goes through in the visual novel. Now, you could also argue that, well, Chaos, I don't think they should. I think that they need to try to adapt all the routes, because otherwise it technically wouldn't be a complete story. You're not getting the full experience, etc., which I would kind of agree, but I think, like I said, Arcwade's route kind of has everything you would need from Tsukihime, and a lot of what you get in the other routes are... You do get important information, but it's really bogged down by unnecessary things, and I think, that if they were to do that, I don't know how they would do that. I think the best way would be to incorporate some of those elements into them adapting the Arcoid route, but like I said, try to do it in a way that kind of makes sense. I know that's hard for a lot of anime studios because they do tend to butcher that quite a bit and add everything, all the elements from all the other routes, and kind of, just kind of put it all together, and it's just really a mess at the end. So maybe this is not the best idea, but I think that that's the only reasonable way to do it, and the only way that would kind of make sense, at least. There is one other way I believe they could do it, in which they could make the other routes OVAs or maybe even movies, but I would say OVA is a more likely option. Movie would be going way too far, in my opinion. I think a movie would be way too long for what these routes are, because I feel like these routes are also shorter than a lot of the near side stuff, because a lot less happens, so you could really cut out a lot of fluff if you were adapting any of these routes. Now, and when I say an OVA episode, I mean maybe like a 30 to 40 minute OVA. I don't mean like an average anime episode length. I think that would be a little bit too short to convey most of the plot for that route. I honestly think that those routes there's so much you could cut out if you were to adapt them, that you really don't need to make another series or a movie or anything like that for any of these routes. Not unless the studio plan to add a lot of their own original material for these, any of these anime adaptations, which I actually think would be a welcome addition if they did try to do something like that. I think that would be interesting, because Tsukihime is something that has definitely not aged well, in my opinion. In terms of its visual, especially in terms of its visuals, it still has a solid story, but it also has a lot of fluff in there. I think there's a lot of things that you could easily cut out, and it would be fine. So I think that's the approach they need to take if they were going to adapt the other routes. And I think that they should probably just be OVAs, or their own separate OVAs. It kind of also depends on whose route you're adapting, because they do tend to vary in terms of how much stuff, how much important information each of them has. Now, there's also another factor to consider in this as well, and that's mainly the relevance of Tsukihime. And all of this, of course, is just me rambling, and this is just a what-if scenario. Like, what if they ever did decide to do this? This is what I think should happen. But I think there's also one other factor, really important factor we need to consider. And this is also, one of the reasons we're not really hearing much about Tsukihime, that it's mainly being overshadowed by, in terms of Type Moon stuff, the Fate franchise. And that's mainly, I believe, due to Fate Grand Order. The Fate Grand Order has basically caused the Fate franchise to sort of blow up a little bit in the West, in terms of, because Fate Grand Order is a mobile game. It's a really popular mobile game, so it's gotten probably a lot of new fans to look into Fate Stay Night, and I'm not opposed to that. I think that's a great thing, because Fate Stay Night is a good visual novel, but of course a lot of the stuff I see from Fate now is stuff relating to Fate Grand Order and servants from there, so I end up being completely lost whenever I look into the fan base, because I don't really play Grand Order that much. I'm mostly just familiar with the original visual novel, and when people look into the original visual novel, they might, that it might just be that these people are Fate Grand Order fans and they don't really know much about the original visual novel, so that's also a possibility. But it could also get them to want to, get into the original visual novel, which is great. But getting back to the point, I think this is one of the reasons why we're not hearing anything about Tsukihime, is because it's obviously being overshadowed by Fate. And I really do like Fate. I think I like Fate a lot better than Tsukihime, but I still do really like Tsukihime. And I think that Tsukihime definitely deserves to get more attention than it really does, because the only reason Tsukihime even would get more attention in the first place is due to the fighting game spin-offs it has, Melty Blood, because it's kind of a thing in the fighting game community. So that's one of the only other reasons people even know about Tsukihime and the characters, is because of Melty Blood. So that's another thing you need to consider as well. It's much more likely we're going to get more adaptations of Fate than we are of anything relating to Tsukihime. It's also much more likely as well that we might get an adaptation of Witch on the Holy Night before we get Tsukihime. And honestly, to be quite honest with you guys, I enjoyed what I played of Witch of the Holy Night Witch on the Holy Night better than Tsukihime, so I would not be opposed to an adaptation of that. But knowing Nasu and knowing Type Moon, we've just heard nothing of this. We've heard nothing about anything being in production or an anime being in production. We've only heard that it's possible. I believe I heard a rumor about Nasu expressing interest in working on a sequel to Witch on the Holy Night, but not doing an anime or anything. But I think Witch on the Holy Night is something that would lend itself much better to an anime adaptation. It doesn't have routes. It has a lot of like really it has a lot of like movement in the visual novel. There's a lot of like really interesting and neat like effects and everything. It's a much easier it would be much easier to adapt that into an anime. So I just think it's much more likely something like that would get an adaptation before Tsukihime. And there's one other thing we need to think about as well. There's the Tsukihime remake. Now, I know we haven't heard anything about the Tsukihime remake at all for quite a while now. I believe the last time we heard anything about it was 2015. It's 2018 right now. So I don't know what is going on with Tsukihime. The Tsukihime remake. I don't know how far along they are in the Tsukihime remake. I don't know what's going on. It really kills me. It really does suck being a fan of these franchises sometimes, because you really don't get any information about what's going on behind the scenes sometimes. You don't know, if this thing is going to happen until right before it happens. So I don't know what's going on. I don't know what the progress is. If somebody has some knowledge of it, it'd be cool if you did let me know, like, if there is actually any progress in the Tsukihime remake, because as far as I know, we're all just kind of sitting here waiting and hoping that this happens sometime in our lifetime. But yeah, we haven't heard much about it, and I think, like I said, it would be more likely that the Tsukihime remake actually would get an anime adaptation, because the Tsukihime remake would be a lot more relevant than the old Tsukihime that came out, I believe, in like 2001. It would probably also be easier to adapt, because it would probably be using a similar engine to Witch on the Holy Night, or have similar effects, so it'd be easier to see something like that be brought over into an anime. There's also that to consider as well, but that's also considering that the remake comes out anytime soon. But again, the remake is also more likely than hypothetically there being another Tsukihime anime. But honestly, I'd be fine with either one. I'd also be fine with a Witch on the Night, Witch on the Night. I'd also be fine with a Witch on the Holy Night anime adaptation as well. Honestly, for being completely honest, I'd probably want a Witch on the Holy Night adaptation more, because I enjoyed the story for that a lot more. But unfortunately, like I said, I just don't see any of that happening because of the massive popularity that Fate has gotten. And let's be honest, from a business standpoint, there's just a lot more money in Fate. I mean, there's more of a financial incentive there for more Fate properties to be adapted, and for more Fate stuff to come out. Honestly, even though I'm a fan of it, I do believe it's a little bit overwhelming. We're getting a lot of stuff related to Fate, which is fine, but it can be hit or miss sometimes. I think, it would be interesting if we saw a return of some of these other properties that Type Moon has, such as Tsukihime or Mahosokai no Yoru. That would be fucking great. I think that if they did a visual novel or an anime adaptation, that would get more people to be interested. I just can't see this sort of thing happening anytime soon. I hate to be so negative about it, but just considering the lack of information about anything in regards to Tsukihime or even Mahosokai no Yoru, Witch on the Holy Night, I just think it's more likely we're just going to be seeing more Fate stuff before we see anything about Tsukihime or Witch on the Holy Night, unfortunately. So that's all I really have to say on this topic. I mean, if we did see a Tsukihime anime, this is how I think it should go. I think that one other thing, I think there is one thing that the JC staff actually kind of did right. They at least implied that Arcade and Shiki had fucking sex. That's something that Fate Stay Night was a little bit too pussy to do, let's be honest. And I know there's a lot of factors with that. I know it also has to do a lot with the Japanese broadcast law and all that kind of stuff. I get that. But I think there's actually even a sex scene in the manga with that. So they went further with it in the manga. So another reason that I recommend reading the manga. But anyways, I think that they should at least imply that that sort of thing happened if they are going to do another anime adaptation for Tsukihime. That's something that they should at least imply, I think. Focus on the relationship aspect with Arcade and Shiki, because if you actually did have the displeasure of seeing the JC Staff anime, they didn't really do too much with their relationship. They didn't really try to focus on the romantic aspect of it. It was just kind of like, yeah, they're kind of working together, and then they just eventually started having sex, and that's basically it. I think there needs to be more focus on that, that aspect of things. Similar with Heaven's Feel, actually, like, how the Heaven's Feel movie had much more of a focus on the romantic aspect with Shiro and Sakura and the, budding romance there. I think it should have kind of a sort of a similar, similar approach to it with the if there is going to be a Tsukihime anime. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if how you think they should approach another Tsukihime anime if they were to do one in the future. I would actually really like to know what you guys think of this, and what you think of us just not hearing anything about, like, any sort of updates, any updates about the Tsukihime remake or anything like that, because yeah, it really sucks just being a fan of this of things like Tsukihime or Maho Suka no Yoro, because you just know there is not really gonna, there's not gonna be much attention put on these things. It's more just going to be about Fate. And again, not saying it's a bad thing. I do love Fate, but I think that some of these other Type Moon franchises, or Type Moon properties, deserve more attention as well, because they are just as good, if not in some ways actually somewhat better. But that's just me. That's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think, and until next time, I'll see you all later.